The dust motes danced in the stadium lights, turning the late afternoon air into a golden haze. Jack Riley, known on set as Jumper Jack, took a deep breath, the scent of canvas, old wood, and sweat filling his lungs. This was his world, his stage, his dangerous ballet, today's act. Controlled fall from the top of a grandstand, approximately 40 feet, onto a carefully prepared airbag, disguised as a pile of rubble. "All right, Jack, you got this, buddy," shouted Leo, one of the prop masters, adjusting a fake crack in the concrete wall below. Jack gave a thumbs up, a familiar smirk playing on his lips. He was 35, lean and muscular, with eyes that held a glint of daring and a smile that had charmed more than a few stunt coordinators into giving him the impossible jobs. For 15 years, he'd been throwing himself off buildings, crashing cars, taking punches, and surviving explosions, all in the name of entertainment. It wasn't just a job, it was a passion. It was how he provided for his daughter, Lily, a bright-eyed 7-year-old, who thought her dad was a real-life superhero. Today's scene was for Glorious Dawn, a sprawling historical epic set during the American Civil War. Jack played a Union soldier, ambushed during a desperate retreat. The fall was supposed to look like he'd been blown off his feet by a cannonball, tumbling down into the chaotic aftermath. "Cameras rolling," came the shout from below. Jack stood at the edge, the wind ruffling his wool uniform. He peered down. The airbag was barely visible, camouflaged perfectly. His mind, trained over years, quickly calculated angles, trajectory, and impact points. He envisioned the fall, the slight twist in the air, the perfect landing. It was always about precision, about minimizing risk in a profession built on it. He thought of Lily's latest drawing taped to his bathroom mirror, a stick figure with a cape labeled Daddy Super Stuntman. It was moments like these, high above the ground, that he felt most like that drawing on the edge, about to take flight. He wasn't fearless, not truly. Fear was a valuable partner, a tiny voice that whispered cautions, keeping him sharp, but courage. That was pushing past the fear, trusting his training, trusting his team action. Jack leaned forward, taking one last look at the distant mountains on the horizon. A view only a few ever saw from this precarious perch. Then he let himself go. It was a controlled tumble, designed to look wild and desperate. Twisted his body, feigning impact from an invisible blast. Arms flailing, the wind whistled past his ears. The ground rushed up to meet him. He could hear the faint shouts of the crew below, the rumble of the camera trucks. This was it, the moment of truth. He braced himself, tucking his chin, aiming for the center of the airbag. The landing was supposed to be a soft thud, a bounce, and then he'd lie still, playing dead. He had done this hundreds of times. He had practiced falls from greater heights, in more awkward positions. This was just another Tuesday. He hit the airbag with a whoosh of displaced air. The impact was exactly as he expected, soft, cushioning, yet firm enough to register. He felt the familiar sensation of bouncing, then settling. He lay there, his breath held, listening for the director's call of "cut," but something felt off. The soft thud was there, but then a sharp, searing pain shot up his right leg. It wasn't the usual ache of a hard landing or a twisted ankle. This was different, deeper, more intense. He tried to shift to alleviate the sudden agony, but a fresh wave of pain made him gasp. He heard frantic shouts, no longer faint. "Medic! Medic!" He opened his eyes, blinking against the harsh lights. Faces were suddenly peering down at him, distorted by worry. He saw Leo's pale face, the director's panicked expression. Jack, are you okay?" Leo's voice was strained. Jack tried to answer, but all he could manage was a ragged breath. The pain was like a white-hot poker in his thigh, twisting, tearing. He tried to move his leg, but it wouldn't respond. Cold dread began to creep through him, replacing the rush of adrenaline. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't a controlled landing. This was something far, far worse. The familiar sights and sounds of the set, once his comfort zone, now blurred into a chaotic, terrifying scene. He heard sirens approaching, faint at first, then growing louder, closer. Hands gently, expertly began to examine him. A medic, his face grim, was cutting away his pant leg. "We need to stabilize him," the medic said, his voice calm but urgent. "Looks like a bad break. A bad break." The words echoed in Jack's mind, each syllable a heavy blow. He knew what that meant. Not just a day or two off, not just a bruised ego. This could mean weeks, months. And in the precarious, fast-paced world of stunt work, weeks or months out of commission could mean the end of a career. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the pain, to block out the horrifying realization dawning on him. He felt the needle prick his arm as pain medication was administered, but it seemed to do little against the overwhelming agony. He was lifted carefully onto a stretcher, the slight movement sending a jolt through his leg that made him cry out, despite himself. As they wheeled him away through the crowd of stunned crew members, past the set that had just moments ago been his domain, Jack looked back. The grandstand loomed dark and imposing against the fading light. The airbag lay innocently below it. A cruel joke, he thought. Of Lily's drawing again, the superhero daddy. He suddenly felt very, very unsuper. He felt vulnerable, and for the first time, in a long time, he felt truly terrifyingly alone. Call of the fall had turned into a scream of pain, and he had no idea what came next. The ambulance siren wailed a mournful tune as it sped through the city streets. Its urgent cry, a stark contrast to the quiet despair settling over Jack. He'd executed it perfectly, or so he thought. He'd aimed for the center, adjusted for the wind. Was it the airbag? Did it shift? Was there something underneath it? Or was it just bad luck? In the world of stunts, bad luck was a terrifying reality. A phantom risk that haunted every high-flying leap and explosive crash. He remembered the dull thud, then the excruciating snap. It wasn't just a break. It felt like something had shattered, crumbled his thigh, specifically the femur, the strongest bone in the body. If that was broken, he was in for a very, very long haul. He felt the cold, hard stretcher beneath him, the subtle sway of the ambulance. He wanted to call Emily, his wife, but his phone was back on set. Probably in his locker. He wanted to tell Lily he was okay, even if he wasn't. He could picture her wide, innocent eyes full of belief in his invincibility. How would he tell her? The ambulance finally screeched to a halt. The back doors flew open, revealing the bright, sterile lights of the emergency room. A team of nurses and doctors was waiting, their faces grim but ready. "Stuntman. Possible compound fracture of the femur," one of the paramedics announced. And Jack winced at the word compound. That meant the bone had pierced the skin. Oh God, he hadn't looked, he couldn't. They wheeled him quickly into a trauma room. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and something metallic, faintly sickening. White coats moved around him, a blur of activity. Questions were fired at him. Rapid fire, name any allergies, pain to keep his voice steady. Prided himself on his pain tolerance, but this was beyond anything he'd ever experienced. A doctor, a woman with kind but firm eyes, leaned over him. "Mr. Riley, we're going to give you something stronger for the pain. Then we need to get you to X-ray." "It looks like a very serious break," he nodded, grateful for the promise of relief. The injection burned for a moment, then a warm, heavy wave began to spread through him, dulling the edges of the agony. He still felt it, a constant throbbing presence, but it was no longer a searing fire. The 10th ray machine hummed and clicked around him. He heard the doctor and technician murmuring about the images, their voices low and serious. He knew what that meant. It wasn't good. Finally, they wheeled him back into a small, curtained-off cubicle. The doctor returned, holding a stack of films. She pulled the curtain shut, giving him a moment of privacy. "Mr. Riley," she began, her voice gentle but direct. "The X-rays confirm a complete transverse fracture of your right femur, mid-shaft. There's also some significant soft tissue damage, and yes, it is an open fracture, meaning the bone broke through the skin. It's a clean break, which is good, but it will require surgery immediately to set the bone and clean the wound. Jack stared at the ceiling tile, feeling as if the air had been sucked out of the room. A complete transverse fracture femur. Open. He understood the medical jargon painfully, so this wasn't a few weeks off. This was months, and for a stuntman, a femur break could mean the end of everything. "How long will I be out?" he managed to ask, his voice raspy. The doctor sighed, a sympathetic sound. 6 months to a year. His entire world felt like it was crumbling around him. A year without work, a year of medical bills, a year of physical therapy, pushing a body that might never be the same. "My career," Jack whispered, the words catching in his throat. Can I go back to stunts?" The doctor hesitated. Her kind eyes met his. "We'll do everything we can to get you back to full function, but returning to that specific type of work, I can't promise you that." Her words were a physical blow, heavier than any fall. The finality in her voice crushed the last vestiges of hope. His career, the one thing he had poured his entire life into, gone, just like that. A nurse poked her head in. "Mr. Riley, your wife is here, and a representative from the studio." Emily, Jack's heart ached. He didn't want her to see him like this, broken, defeated, but he needed her. He needed to hold her hand, even if it meant admitting the horrifying truth. He looked at the doctor, forcing a nod. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice hollow. The curtain opened and Emily rushed in, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear and unshed tears. She saw him, saw the medical tubes and wires, the stark whiteness of the room, and her hand flew to her mouth. "Jack, oh my God, what happened?" she cried, her voice trembling. He managed a weak smile, trying to reassure her, but the effort was too great. The doctor stepped forward, gently explaining the extent of his injuries. Using the same somber tone as the doctor spoke, Emily's face grew even paler. Her hand instinctively reached for his, squeezing tightly. Then came the studio representative, a slick, impeccably dressed man named Mr. Thompson. He looked at Jack with a practiced, detached sympathy. "Mr. Riley, on behalf of the studio, we are deeply sorry for this unfortunate, and we assure you our insurance will cover your immediate medical expenses. And we will conduct, rehearsed." They offered no comfort, no real concern for Jack's future. Immediate expenses. What about everything after that? What about his salary? What about Lily? The stark reality of his situation crashed down on him with overwhelming force. His body was broken, his career was likely over, and the very company he risked his life for was already hedging their bets. The fall had ended, but a new, far more terrifying fall had just begun. The fall into uncertainty, into financial ruin, into a future he couldn't even begin to imagine. The days that followed were a blur of pain medication and the grim reality of hospital life. Jack underwent a long, complex surgery to repair his femur. They inserted a metal rod, screws and plates, a new permanent part of him. When he woke up, the initial searing pain was dulled, replaced by a constant throbbing ache and the heavy, uncomfortable weight of his cast. Emily was a constant presence by his side, her strength a lifeline in his despair. She brought him Lily's drawings, read him the newspaper, and patiently listened as he vented his frustrations and fears. But even her unwavering support couldn't erase the dark cloud hanging over them: money. Mr. Thompson, the studio's representative, had made a brief appearance the day after surgery. He delivered a bouquet of generic flowers and reiterated the studio's sympathies. He also left a stack of forms for Jack to sign, forms about liability, waivers and insurance claims. The language was cold, legalistic, designed to protect the studio, not to truly help Jack. "So, they're just covering the initial hospital stay?" Emily asked, her voice tight with worry, after Mr. Thompson had departed. Jack nodded, flipping through the daunting paperwork. "That's what it says. Immediate medical expenses directly related to the onset injury. It doesn't mention anything about physical therapy, follow-up surgeries, medication, or, my income." His salary was the biggest worry. Stuntmen were independent contractors, paid per job, per stunt. There was no sick leave, no long-term disability unless you paid for it yourself. And even then, it was rarely enough to cover prolonged absence. Jack had savings, of course, but they wouldn't last long. Not with no income coming in and mounting expenses. What about workers' comp? Emily asked, ever practical. Doesn't apply to independent contractors, Jack replied, running a hand through his hair. Not in this industry. We sign away those rights when we sign our contracts. It's the risk we take. The risk we take now felt like a cruel joke. He had taken the risk, and now he was paying the price, literally. The medical bills started arriving almost immediately, even before he left the hospital. Thick envelopes stuffed with itemized lists, surgery fees, anesthesia, nursing care, medication, x-rays, MRI scans. Each bill was a punch to the gut, the numbers astronomical. Even with the studio's initial coverage, the total was staggering. Over $100,000 for just the surgery in first few days, Emily whispered one evening, looking at a stack of bills. Her face was pale in the dim hospital room light, and they're only covering part of it, his voice flat. The studio's insurance only covers what they deem essential. And Directy arguing about some of the pain medication and the luxury of her private room. Luxury? Emily scoffed. "You risked your life." "They say I knew the risks," Jack said, repeating the line he'd heard countless times in this industry. It was true, he did, but it didn't make the consequences any easier to bear. His leg throbbed, a constant reminder of his shattered reality. He couldn't work, he couldn't even walk without assistance. He needed months of physical therapy, maybe even more surgeries down the line. The doctor had been clear. Returning to stunts was highly unlikely. His career, his identity, was gone, and with it, his ability to provide. He thought of Lily, her innocent face, her endless questions about when he was coming home. How would they afford to live? The house payments, the grocery bills, Lily's school, her dance classes, every single expense suddenly loomed large, terrifying. Tried to distract himself, watching old movies on the hospital TV, but even those offered no escape. Every action scene, every car chase, every explosion reminded him of what he'd lost. He saw the stuntmen, leaping, fighting, doing what he loved, and a bitter envy coiled in his stomach. One afternoon he had a particularly bad session with a physical therapist. The pain was excruciating, the progress agonizingly slow. He felt weak, pathetic. When the therapist left, Jack felt a wave of despair wash over him. He closed his eyes, tears prickling at the corners. "I don't know how we're going to do this, Emerd," he confessed later that day, his voice thick with emotion. Emily was carefully combing his hair, a small act of tenderness that broke his heart. "I'm broken, and I can't earn. We'll lose everything." Emily stopped, her hands resting gently on his head. She knelt beside his bed, taking his good hand. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but still full of a fierce determination. "No, we won't, Jack. We're a team. We'll figure something out. We always do." But her voice lacked its usual certainty. He knew she was as terrified as he was. They had always been resourceful, but this was different. This wasn't a temporary setback. This was a complete upheaval of their lives. Just when he thought he couldn't sink any lower, the final blow came in the mail. A formal letter from the studio. A standard form. It stated that due to his extended inability to perform his duties, his contract was terminated. Effective immediately. They wished him a speedy recovery and thanked him for his past contributions. It was a polite but brutal dismissal. Jack crumpled the letter in his fist, the flimsy paper feeling like a condemnation. They were done with him, used up, discarded. The studio, which represented the entire industry he loved, had turned its back on him. He was out of the game, injured and rapidly spiraling into a financial abyss. Prospect of losing their home, of not being able to provide for Lily, was a constant gnawing pain, worse than any physical injury. He lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling utterly helpless, adrift in a sea of worry and despair. The future looked bleak, a dark, empty canvas where his vibrant life used to be. Days turned into weeks, marked by the slow, painful progress of physical therapy and the relentless arrival of more bills. Jack was discharged from the hospital, a wheelchair, his new unwelcome companion. The house, once a bustling hub of family life, now felt like a prison. He spent his days on the couch, his leg propped up, watching Lily play, a pang of guilt hitting him every time she asked him to chase her. Emily, bless her heart, was juggling everything, taking care of him, managing the household, trying to keep Lily's spirits up, and now working extra shifts at her part-time job as a bookkeeper. She never complained, but Jack saw the exhaustion etched on her face, the worry lines around her eyes. "We need to talk about options," Emily said one evening after Lily was asleep. She sat across from him, a stack of bills between them casting long shadows. "The savings are dwindling fast. We can make it another 2, maybe 3 months if we're really careful." After that, her voice trailed off, but Jack knew what she meant. They would have to sell the house. He looked around their living room, filled with memories. Lily's first steps, Christmas mornings, family movie nights. The thought of losing it made his stomach clench. "I can try applying for disability," Jack offered, though he knew the process was long and uncertain, and the payments barely enough to scrape by. "Or maybe I can find some kind of desk job, something I can do from home." But what his skills were specific, physical. He was a stuntman, that's all he'd ever been. "I've already called around," Emily said, anticipating his thought. The studio's HR department was polite but firm. "No open positions that would fit your current situation, and other production companies are wary. They see a long-term injury." He was no longer an asset, he was a problem. Despair began to settle into Jack's bones, deeper than the ache in his leg. He felt useless, a burden. He tried to stay positive for Emily and Lily, but the darkness was hard to fight off. He had nightmares of Lily crying because they couldn't afford her dance classes anymore, of Emily looking at him with resentment one afternoon. A familiar face appeared at their door. It was Mike, a fellow stuntman and one of Jack's oldest friends in the industry. Mike looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his hat. "Hey, Jack," Emily, he mumbled. Stepping inside, he brought a casserole, a small kind gesture. "Mike." "Good to see you," Jack said, trying to sound cheerful. He missed the camaraderie of the set, the easy banter. Typical. "Those suits don't care about us once. We're not making them money." Jack nodded grimly. "Tell me about it." Mike hesitated, then cleared his throat. "Look, Jack, I've been talking to some of the guys on set about what happened. Everyone's really shook up. And, well, someone else heard about it, too." Jack raised an eyebrow, curious despite his apathy. "Well, you know how Glorious Dawn is filming on the same lot as the Elvis movie?" Mike said, lowering his voice. Conspiratorially, Jack blinked. The Elvis movie Ting Creole, he thought. He knew Elvis Presley was on the lot, a massive star, always surrounded by his entourage. He'd never even seen him up close, let alone spoken to him. Why would Elvis care about a lowly stuntman? "Yeah, so apparently the word got to him," Mike continued. "He's apparently very particular about how people are treated on set. He heard about your injury, and then he heard about how the studio was handling it. He wasn't happy, from what I hear." Jack snorted, a humorless sound. "Elvis Presley is concerned about my workers' rights? Sounds like a stretch, Mike." "No, seriously," Mike insisted, leaning forward. "My buddy, Charlie, he's a grip on the King Creole set. He said Elvis was talking about it. How it's not right, how stuntmen are the unsung heroes and don't get enough credit or protection. Said something about no man should be left behind on my watch." Jack and Emily exchanged a look. It sounded almost too fantastical to be true. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, championing a random injured stuntman. Anyway, Mike continued, Charlie said Elvis's manager, Colonel Parker, was trying to calm him down, saying it wasn't their problem. But well, this is the weird part. Mike paused, taking a breath. Charlie said someone from Elvis's team, maybe his assistant, was asking around about your hospital room number and your home address. Jack felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in weeks, intrigue and a tiny, almost imperceptible spark of hope. Asking about me? Yeah, Mike confirmed. I don't know why. Maybe he just wants to send flowers or a get well card. But Charlie seemed to think it was more than that. He said Elvis seemed genuinely upset, almost like he took it personally. Mike left soon after, wishing Jack well and promising to keep an ear out for any news about stunt jobs. Jack and Emily were left in silence, the casserole forgotten. What do you think? Emily finally asked, her voice hushed. Jack shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. I think Mike's been reading too many fan magazines. Elvis Presley doesn't know I exist. He's got bigger things to worry about than my broken leg. But despite his skepticism, that tiny spark of hope persisted. It was illogical, absurd even, but the idea, however fleeting, that someone, anyone, might genuinely care, especially someone of Elvis Presley's stature, was a comforting thought. It was a whisper in the overwhelming silence of his despair, a glimmer of light in the darkness of his financial abyss. Dismissed it as a pipe dream, but a small part of him, the part that still believed in impossible leaps and miraculous landings, wondered what if. The whisper of hope that Mike had planted slowly faded over the next 2 days, replaced by the familiar weight of reality. No one from Elvis's team called. No flowers arrived from Graceland. Jack chided himself for even entertaining such a wild fantasy. Superstars didn't get involved in the everyday struggles of working people, especially not injured stuntmen. He was back to the grueling routine of physical therapy, his leg protesting with every bend and stretch. Emily continued to work tirelessly, her face increasingly drawn. Lily, sensing the tension had grown quieter, her usual boisterous energy subdued. The house felt smaller, the air thicker with unspoken worries. One sunny afternoon, Jack was attempting to hobble from the living room to the kitchen. On his crutches, a monumental effort that left him breathless and sweating. Emily was out picking up Lily from school. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic squeak of his crutches. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Jack paused, startled. He wasn't expecting anyone. Most of his friends from the set were busy with new projects. Carefully made his way to the front door, his heart sinking a little. It was probably just a salesperson or another bill. He opened the door slowly, peering through the crack, and then he froze. Standing on his porch, casually leaning against the doorframe, was a man who needed no introduction. Tall, impeccably dressed in a sharp suit, with dark, slicked-back hair and a smile that had graced a million magazine covers. His eyes, a striking shade of blue, held a warmth that was instantly disarming. It was Elvis Presley. Jack stared speechless. For a moment, he wondered if he was hallucinating, if the pain medication was finally making him crazy. But no, the man was undeniably real, emanating an almost palpable aura of charisma and star power. Mr. Riley? Elvis asked, his voice a smooth, deep baritone, exactly as it sounded on his records. Elvis Presley, hope I'm not disturbing you. Jack finally found his voice. A strangled whisper. Mr. Presley? I know. Not at all, please. Come in. He fumbled with the crutches, stepping back to allow the most famous man in America into his modest living room. Elvis stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the room with genuine interest, not judgment. Please, call me Elvis. He extended a hand, and Jack, momentarily forgetting his injury, instinctively reached out with his good hand, shaking it. Elvis's grip was Presley. "But why are you here?" Jack finally managed to ask, bewildered. Elvis's smile softened. "Please, Elvis, and the reason I'm here, Mr. Riley, is because I heard about what happened to you on set. Heard it was a nasty fall." He paused, his gaze resting on Jack's cast. "I also heard about how the studio's been treating you, and frankly, that just ain't right." Jack blinked. It was true. Then Mike wasn't just spinning tales. Elvis walked over to the sofa, his movements graceful, and sat down, crossing one leg over the other. He looked completely at ease, as if he visited injured stuntmen on a daily basis. "I'd been on enough movie sets to know the risks you fellas take. You the ones who make us actors look good, make the movies exciting. You put your bodies on the line day in and day out, and then, when something goes wrong, the studio washes its hands of you. That's just not how things should be." Jack, still in shock, found a chair to sit in carefully, positioning his leg. It's the way it is in this business, Elvis. We're independent contractors. We know the score." "Knowing the score don't make it right," Elvis countered, his blue eyes intense. "My daddy always taught me, you look out for folks who work hard, who put their trust in you. And you fellas, you put your trust in the production, in the equipment, in the people around you. You deserve more than a cold shoulder and a stack of bills. When things go south, I understand you got a serious injury, Mr. Riley, a femur break. That's a long road. And I hear the studio ain't offering much beyond the bare minimum for your initial treatment." Jack nodded, his throat tight. He still couldn't quite believe this conversation was happening. "And your salary," Elvis continued, his gaze piercing. "You're out of work, ain't you? Can't work with a leg like that. How long before you're back on your feet, really back on your feet?" "The doctor said 6 months to a year, maybe more," Jack admitted, the words tasting bitter. "And then there's no guarantee I can even go back to stunts. Might have to find something else entirely." Elvis nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. "That's a heavy burden, Mr. Riley. A heavy burden for any man, let alone a man with a family to support." Just then the front door opened and Emily walked in, Lily skipping beside her, clutching a drawing. "Hello there, little lady, and you must be Mrs. Riley." He stood up gracefully, extending a hand to Emily. "Elvis Presley, it's a pleasure to meet you." Emily, flustered, managed to shake his hand, her cheeks flushed. "Mr. Presley, we didn't expect—" "Please call me Elvis," he repeated kindly. "I was just having a chat with your husband about his unfortunate accident." Lily, meanwhile, had recovered from her initial shock, and with the fearlessness of a child, walked right up to Elvis, holding out her drawing. "I drew a picture for you. It's a blue suede shoe," Elvis chuckled, taking the drawing. "Well, bless your heart, darling, that's the prettiest blue suede shoe I ever did see." He ruffled her hair gently. Watching this surreal scene unfold, Jack felt a strange mix of disbelief and a flicker of something new, a warmth that began to thaw the cold despair. That wall. Why was Elvis Presley in his living room, talking about his medical bills and his future? The answer was about to shock him even further. Elvis, still holding Lily's drawing, sat back down, his gaze returning to Jack and Emily, now standing together, looking utterly bewildered. Lily, meanwhile, had plumped herself down on the floor near Elvis's feet, clearly fascinated. "Mr. Riley," Elvis began, his voice serious again, though still gentle. "Jack, I didn't just come here to offer my sympathies, though you certainly have them. I came here because I believe in doing what's right, and I don't believe any man should be left out in the cold after risking his neck for a picture. I know this is a long shot, and you might think I'm crazy, but I've been blessed in my life far more than I ever imagined, and I believe that when you're blessed, you have a responsibility to help those who aren't so lucky. Especially when they're hurting." Jack and Emily exchanged a glance, their confusion growing. "So here's my proposition, Jack. Elvis continued, his voice steady and clear. "I'm going to take care of everything. All your medical bills from here on out for this injury. Every single one, physical forif. Any for me. And your salary, I'll make sure you and your family are taken care of, that you receive your full stuntman salary every week until you're back on your feet. Or until you find a new path." The words hung in the air, echoing in the stunned silence of the living room. Jack felt as if he'd been hit by a truck. But this time the impact wasn't painful. It was a dizzying rush of disbelief. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, tears instantly welling in her eyes. "What?" Jack finally managed to croak out, his voice barely audible. "Elvis, you can't be serious. That's impossible. You don't owe us anything." Elvis's gaze was unwavering. "I'm perfectly serious, Jack, and maybe I don't owe you personally, but I feel a debt to every working man and woman who busts their tail to make a living, especially those who work in this crazy business alongside me. You're part of the team, Jack, and no one on my team gets left behind." Pulled out a slim leather-bound notebook and a pen from his inside jacket pocket. "My assistant Joe, he'll be in touch with your doctors, with the hospital, with your insurance company. He'll handle all the paperwork. You won't have to worry about another bill again. And as for your salary, we'll work out the details with Emily. It'll be deposited into your account, same as if you were on set." Emily, tears streaming down her face, sank onto the arm of Jack's chair, burying her face in her hands. Jack, still in shock, just stared at Elvis, trying to press the magnitude of the offer. It was beyond anything. "But why, Elvis?" Jack asked, a lump forming in his throat. "Why would you do this? For a stranger?" Elvis leaned back, a thoughtful expression on his face. "And third, well, I've had my own share of close calls in this business. Not like yours, mind you, but I've been lucky, real lucky. And sometimes luck ain't enough. Sometimes a man needs a hand." He glanced at Lily, who was now looking up at him with wide, curious eyes, sensing the powerful emotions in the room. "And you got a little one here. Every child deserves to have their daddy. Well and strong, without him worrying about how he's going to keep the roof over their head." Jack felt the tears welling up in his own eyes, now hot and unexpected. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. Emily reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly, her own tears blurring her vision. We don't know what to say, Elvis." Emily choked out, finally looking up. This is truly a miracle." Elvis smiled, a genuine, humble smile that softened his superstar aura. "No miracle, ma'am, just a little common decency and the good Lord's blessing." He stood up, signaling that his visit was drawing to a close. "My assistant will call you tomorrow morning, Emily, to get all the necessary information. Don't you worry about a thing." He walked over to the door, Lily following him closely. He bent down, handing her back her drawing. "You keep practicing, darlin'. That's a fine shoe. Maybe one day you'll draw me a whole new wardrobe." Lily giggled, clutching the paper at the door. Elvis turned back to Jack. "You focus on getting better, Jack. That's your only job. Now rest, heal, and take care of that beautiful family of yours. And don't you worry about a thing." With a final nod and a quiet "take care, folks," Elvis Presley was gone, stepping out of their modest home and back into his legendary life, leaving behind two stunned, tearful, and overwhelmingly grateful. Jack and Emily stood there for a long moment, listening to the faint sound of a car driving away. The silence that followed was different now, no longer heavy with despair, but filled with a new, fragile sense of hope. The impossible had just happened. A superstar had walked into their lives and offered them a lifeline. Jack looked at Emily, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and profound relief. The financial abyss that had threatened to swallow them whole had just been bridged by an act of unimaginable kindness. The morning after Elvis Presley's visit, Jack and Emily woke up in a haze of disbelief. Had it truly happened, or was it just a vivid dream born of desperation? But then the phone rang. It was a man named Joe, Elvis's personal assistant, his voice calm and efficient. "Mrs. Riley, Joe Esposito, here, calling on behalf of Mr. Presley and her stay." Emily's heart leaped. It was real. "Yes, Mr. Esposito, he did. It was quite a surprise." "Indeed," Joe chuckled. "Mr. Presley is a man of his word. I'll need you to provide me with all of Mr. Riley's medical invoices, past and present, as well as the contact information for his doctors and any therapy-style I'll ask to need details regarding." Emily, still a little shaky, carefully relayed all the information. Joe was incredibly professional, reassuring her that everything would be handled with discretion and speed. He even suggested they set up a separate bank account for the salary payments, purely for their convenience. After the call, Emily collapsed onto the sofa next to Jack, a mix of tears and laughter bubbling up. "It's real, Jack. It's really real." Jack squeezed her hand. A lump in his throat. The heavy, crushing weight that had been pressing down on them for weeks suddenly began to lift. It wasn't gone completely. Recovery was still a long, arduous road. But the most terrifying part, the financial burden, had been miraculously taken away. Over the next few days, Joe Esposito proved to be as good as his word. He called the hospital, the insurance companies, Jack's physical therapy clinic. Within a week, a thick envelope arrived in the mail, filled with official letters. All outstanding medical bills were marked paid in full. Future bills, they were informed, were to be sent directly to Mr. Presley's office. And then a week later, the first salary payment arrived in their newly set up bank account. It was the full amount Jack usually earned, consistent, reliable. Emily checked the balance 3 times just to be sure it was there. Enough money to cover their mortgage, their groceries, Lily's school, everything. The effect on Jack was immediate and profound. The despair that had clung to him like a shroud began to dissipate. He still had the pain, the limitations, the uncertainty about his future career, but the crushing anxiety of financial ruin was gone. He could breathe again. His physical therapy sessions, which had felt like torturous reminders of his brokenness, now felt like stepping stones toward a new future. He attacked them with renewed vigor, focusing not on what he couldn't do, but on what he could regain. Each small improvement, each tiny increase in his range of motion felt like a victory. "You seem different," his physical therapist, Sarah, observed one session, watching him carefully lift his leg. "More determined," Jack grinned, sweat beading on his forehead. "Got a new motivation, Sarah, a very expensive one." He couldn't tell her about Elvis. Joe had quietly emphasized the need for discretion, as Elvis preferred his acts of charity to be private. But he could certainly feel the effect. Emily, too, seemed to blossom. The worry lines around her eyes softened. She even booked Lily for a new ballet class. She'd been wanting to try something they couldn't have even considered weeks ago. Oblivious to the source of their renewed calm, was simply delighted that her daddy was getting better and that her mommy wasn't sad anymore. Beneath it was Butchers. For Jack. But now, they included him. Standing tall, sometimes even, with a femid. Was Temin? A note attached. Read, "For when you're feeling ready, music has a way of healing." Jack, who had always loved music but never had the time to truly learn an instrument, stared at the guitar. It was a thoughtful, personal gesture, not just a generic gift. It wasn't about stunts anymore or performing. It was about finding joy, about healing. It was a silent message of support, a reminder that someone somewhere cared about his well-being beyond his ability to jump off buildings. He carefully picked up the guitar, its smooth wood warm beneath his fingers. He plucked a string, a soft, resonant note filling the quiet room. Maybe, he thought, maybe there was a different kind of music in his future. The journey was still long. He still had days where the pain was relentless, where frustration threatened to overwhelm him. Now, when those dark moments came, he no longer felt utterly alone. The knowledge that Elvis Presley, a complete stranger, had extended such extraordinary kindness changed everything. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the profound human connection, the unexpected empathy that had pulled him back from the brink of despair. The weight had lifted, and in its place a quiet, profound gratitude began to grow. Jack Riley, the stuntman, was still recovering, but for the first time in months he felt truly, incredibly hopeful. Months passed, each one bringing Jack closer to recovery. His physical therapy progressed steadily, albeit slowly. Pain was still a constant companion, a dull throb in his mended femur, but it was manageable. He graduated from crutches to a cane, then to walking on his own, albeit with a slight limp that reminded him of the ordeal he'd endured. True to his word, Elvis Presley's team continued to manage all of Jack's medical expenses. No bill ever reached their mailbox. Each week, Jack's full stuntman salary was deposited into their account, an unfailing testament to the King's generosity. This allowed Emily to focus on her part-time work without the crushing pressure of providing all their income, and it allowed Jack to dedicate himself fully to his rehabilitation. Quiet connection with Elvis was maintained through Joe Esposito. Joe would call every few weeks just to check in. "How's Mr. Riley doing? Any new developments? Anything you need?" His inquiries were always polite, respectful, never intrusive. Jack never spoke directly to Elvis again, and that was fine. He knew Elvis was a busy man, a global superstar. The gesture itself was more than enough. But there were subtle reminders that Elvis hadn't forgotten them. A new record album arrived in the mail personally, signed to Jack and Emily Keep On Truckin' E-Pay. Later, a small framed photo of Elvis and Lily from their brief meeting arrived, a sweet memory of that surreal day. These small gestures, thoughtfully sent, reinforced the feeling that this wasn't just a financial transaction. It was a genuine act of compassion. Jack, spurred by Elvis's gift, started taking guitar lessons. His fingers, initially clumsy and sore, slowly learned to form chords. He found a new kind of rhythm, a different type of performance. It was a slow process, but it filled the void left by his former career. He wasn't sure if he'd ever be a great guitarist, but it was a soothing, meditative pursuit, a way to channel his frustration and pain into something constructive. One day, while practicing a simple folk tune, Lily walked in and sat beside him. "Daddy, that sounds nice." "Thanks, sweet pea," he said, strumming a little more confidently. "Still got a long way to go." "Are you going to sing like Elvis now?" she asked, her eyes wide. Jack chuckled. "Not quite, darling. Nobody sings like Elvis." But the thought brought a smile to his face. Elvis had given him more than just money. He'd given him the space and peace of mind to heal and to explore a new facet of himself. As the physical recovery progressed, Jack started grappling with the reality of his future. The doctor had been right. While he was walking and living a normal life, returning to the high-impact, bone-jarring world of stunt work was simply not an option. His leg, though mended, would never be able to withstand the repeated trauma. The risks were too high. This realization, while expected, was still tough. It was the end of an era, the closing of a chapter that had defined his adult life. He mourned the loss, the thrill, the camaraderie, but the despair he'd felt initially was gone. He wasn't trapped anymore. Elvis's generosity had given him time, and time had given him perspective. "What are you thinking about doing now, Jack?" Emily asked one evening as they sat on the porch swing watching the sunset. He was no longer using his cane. A small but significant victory. He paused, considering. "I've been talking to Mike and some of the other guys. There's a real need for good stunt coordinators, someone who knows the practical side, but also understands safety, someone who's been in the trenches, literally." Emily looked at him, her eyes shining. "You'd be amazing at that, Jack. You know all the angles, all the risks, and you're great with people. Not jumping off buildings," he mused, "but it's still being part of the action, still telling stories. And I could actually help make things safer for the next generation of stuntmen." A new purpose, a new path began to emerge clear and bright. He thought of Elvis, His kindness wasn't just a handout. It was an investment in Jack's ability to heal, to find a new purpose, to ultimately contribute to the world in a different way. It was a testament to the ripple effect of generosity, how one act of profound kindness could transform not just a life, but a future. One afternoon, as he was out in the yard testing his leg with a walk around the block, he saw a black Cadillac, long and sleek, pull up down the street. A figure emerged distinctive even from a distance. It was Elvis. He was talking to a neighbor, laughing. He wasn't there for Jack. Just passing through the neighborhood, perhaps. On his way from the studio, Jack hesitated. Should he go over? Thank him again. But Elvis was surrounded by a few curious onlookers, and Jack remembered Joe's words about discretion. Instead, Jack just stood there watching, a quiet smile on his face. He lifted his hand in a small, almost imperceptible wave, a silent gesture of profound gratitude. Elvis didn't see him. He got back in his car, and with a low rumble, the Cadillac pulled away, disappearing down the street. But the feeling of gratitude lingered, warm and comforting. Jack knew, deep in his heart, that he would never forget what Elvis Presley had done for him. It wasn't just money, it was freedom. It was hope. It was the chance to rebuild his life. And that was a debt he could never truly repay, only honor by living his best life, by paying forward the kindness he had received. A year and a half after the accident, Jack Riley stood on a movie set, not in uniform but in a director's chair. His right leg still held the memory of the injury, a faint stiffness on cold mornings, but he walked without a limp now, his movements confident. He was no longer Jumper Jack. He was Coordinator Riley, a respected stunt coordinator, known for his meticulous planning and his unwavering commitment to safety. The production was a new western, dusty and sprawling. Jack was overseeing a complex horse foal, guiding the stunt riders and the horse wranglers through every step, ensuring every pad was in place, every landing zone clear. He had found his new purpose, a way to stay in the industry he loved, but from a different, safer vantage point. His new role suited him. He was a natural leader, calm under pressure, with an innate understanding of how a stunt should look, and more importantly, how to execute it with minimal risk. He brought his first-hand experience of injury to every discussion, every plan, advocating fiercely for the safety of the stunt performers under his care. Financially, they were stable. Elvis's payments had continued for over a year, seeing him through the bulk of his recovery in the initial phase of establishing himself as a coordinator. The last payment had arrived a few months ago, accompanied by a short, handwritten note from Elvis himself. Jack heard you're doing great, knew you had it in you. Keep on, keeping on, EP. It was a subtle, encouraging message, a final seal on a chapter of extraordinary generosity. Jack had sent a heartfelt thank you letter back, expressing his profound gratitude for everything. He knew words weren't enough, but he wanted Elvis to know the depth of the impact his kindness had made. He imagined Elvis sitting in his mansion, perhaps glancing at the letter, then setting it aside, already on to the next kind act. He rarely sought recognition for his generosity. One crisp afternoon on set, during a break in filming, Jack saw a familiar sleek black Cadillac pull up. His heart gave a familiar little thump. Elvis, he was filming another movie on a nearby soundstage, and sometimes visited other sets during downtime. Elvis emerged, surrounded by a small entourage, but his gaze swept the set and his eyes found Jack. He broke away from his group, walking directly toward him, a warm smile on his face. "Jack Riley, look at you, man. Back in the saddle, eh?" Elvis extended a hand, his grip firm. "Elvis," Jack said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "Good to see you. Yeah, back on set. A little less jumping, a little more directing." Elvis chuckled. "That's the smart way to do it. You look good, Jack. Really good. Heard you're a top-notch coordinator now. Thanks to you, I had the time to heal and the peace of mind to figure out what was next. I can never thank you enough." Elvis waved a dismissive hand. "No need for thanks, Jack. Just glad to see you whole and happy. That's thanks enough for me." His eyes scanned Jack's leg. A quick, almost imperceptible glance. "Everything good there?" "Better than good, Elvis. You saved my life, my family's life. You truly did." Jack's voice was thick with emotion. It was the first time he'd seen Elvis in person since that unbelievable day in his living room, and the weight of it was immense. Elvis's smile softened. "That's what we're put here for, Jack, to help each other out when we can. You were dealt a bad hand, and you didn't deserve it. Glad I could be there to help you reshuffle the deck." He clapped Jack on the shoulder. "Well, I gotta run. Studio's probably wondering where I am. Just wanted to say hello." "Keep up the good work, Jack. You're making a difference." With a final nod, Elvis turned and walked back toward his car, leaving Jack standing there watching him go. The encounter was brief, yet deeply meaningful. It wasn't about fanfare or grand gestures. It was a simple acknowledgement. A quiet moment between two men, one who had given and one who had received, and whose lives had been forever intertwined by an act of profound kindness. As Elvis's car disappeared from view, Jack turned back to the set, a renewed sense of purpose coursing through him. He had faced the abyss, seen his world crumble, but he had been pulled back by an unexpected hand. A hand belonging to a king, yes, but more importantly, to a compassionate human being. The horse fall was ready. Jack raised his hand. His voice strong and clear. He was no longer the man who fell. He was the man who made sure others could rise. And that, he realized, was a triumph. All its own years turned into decades. Jack Riley, the former stuntman, became a legendary stunt coordinator in Hollywood. His reputation for safety, innovation, and integrity was unmatched. He trained new generations of stunt performers, instilling in them not just the techniques of their craft, but also the importance of looking out for one another. He advocated tirelessly for better protection and insurance for stunt people, a quiet, persistent voice in an industry that was slow to change. His limp eventually faded into a distant memory. A slight favoring of his right leg on long days. He played guitar regularly, not for crowds but for Emily and Lily in their living room, teaching Lily the chords, filling their home with music. Lily grew into a bright, independent young woman. She heard the story of Elvis Presley, often, but cherished family legend. She even wrote a school paper about it, marveling at the unlikely act of generosity that had saved her family. She understood the deeper meaning, that one person's kindness could ripple outwards, changing countless lives. Emily, ever his rock, watched Jack thrive in his new role. Her heart filled with gratitude. They never forgot the struggle, the despair, or the miracle that had pulled them back. Every Christmas, they quietly made a significant donation to a charity that supported injured entertainment industry workers, a way to pay forward the blessing they had received, the news of Elvis Presley's passing in 1977. He felt a profound sense of loss, not just for the musical icon, but for the man who had shown him such compassion. He remembered Elvis's words. "That's what we're put here for, Jack, to help each other out when we can." It was a simple philosophy, one that Jack had truly taken to heart. One evening, many years later, Jack sat on his porch swing, watching the stars, much like he had done with Emily during those difficult months of recovery. Emily joined him, a warm blanket around her shoulders. "Thinking about him, aren't you?" she asked softly, knowing. Jack nodded. "Always. It's funny, isn't it? I only met him a couple of times, briefly, but he changed everything." "He saw you, Jack," Emily said, taking his hand. "He didn't just see a stunt man. He saw a man, a husband, a father, who was hurting, and he chose to help." "He didn't have to," Jack mused. "Most people wouldn't, especially someone as famous as him. He had nothing to gain, except knowing he did the right thing." Emily countered. "That's worth more than money to some people," Jack smiled. He had a good heart, a true king, not just of rock and roll, but of kindness. He often thought about the what-ifs. What if Elvis hadn't heard about his injury? What if he hadn't cared? Jack's life would have been vastly different, likely filled with hardship and regret. He might have lost his home, his sense of purpose, perhaps even his spirit. But because of one man's extraordinary generosity, that dark alternate future had been averted. His career as a stunt coordinator flourished, pioneered new safety techniques, always pushing for better equipment and more stringent protocols. He made it his mission to ensure that no stuntman under his watch would ever face the same terrifying uncertainty he had. He became known as Jack the Safe, a testament to his dedication. One young stuntman, fresh out of training, came up to Jack after a particularly tricky scene. "Mr. Riley, I heard the story. Is it true?" "About Elvis." Jack smiled, a familiar warmth spreading through him. "Every word, son, every single word. That's incredible." The young man breathed clearly in awe. "I mean, Elvis Presley just paying for everything for a stuntman he barely knew." "That's the kind of man he was," Jack affirmed. "He understood that some risks are necessary for the job, but the risk of being left behind, broken and forgotten, shouldn't be one of them." He looked at the young man, his eyes full of earnestness and hope. "That's why we do what we do here, kid. We look out for each other because sometimes all it takes is one person, one act of kindness to change a life." Jack Riley lived a full, happy life. He saw Lily grow up, get married, and have children of her own. He saw his industry slowly but surely become a safer place for the brave men and women who put their lives on the line. And through it all, the memory of Elvis Presley, the king who had extended a hand when he was most broken, remained a profound and heartwarming anchor in his heart. It was a story not just of a celebrity's generosity, but of the deep, lasting impact of human compassion. A reminder that even in the toughest moments, kindness could emerge from the most unexpected places, leaving a legacy far more powerful and enduring than any song or movie.